Very well. Professor, being an expert on public procurement, how do you assess the public procurement and the adoption of the public procurement in Portugal?
Portugal has been a very interesting case of change, because when you change from paperwork procurement to electronic procurement, nowadays most obstacles are not technological. Why? Because we live in a society with a fantastic offer of good quality, cheap and ubiquitous technology. So that's not the problem. Most of the problems come from human side. As you know, in public administration we have a famous triangle I used to call the golden triangle, which includes the civil servant, the process and paper. That triangle started 3,000–4,000 years ago in China. That's why they invented paper. Paper is a spin-off of public administration, because before that they used systems like materials produced from skins and so on. It was not practical. So to develop public administration, Chinese invented paper. And this triangle has been stable for many thousand years, several thousand years. You have the civil servant, the process and paper. When you change that and you say, okay, you can have civil servant, perhaps fewer civil servants. You can have process, perhaps more intelligent process, but you don't have paper. That's a fantastic change. And people are afraid of changes. So I would say that the major challenge to adopt e-public procurement is the process of managing human change, public organizations, suppliers and so on. Portugal is a small country with a few problems, as you are aware, but we are good on managing process of change. For instance, in terms of e-government, Portugal, in a few years, in about 7–8 years, has gone from a very backward situation to the top level in Europe. Let me just call you that right now more than 90% of Portuguese people submit their tax declarations by web. Unfortunately, taxes are going up, but that's a different story. E-procurement is a different subject. And in the United States, just 50% of people do that. So we are very good on managing these processes of change. And the case of electronic public procurement was very interesting, because the governments, since 2002, at the time was Prime Minister, the present President of the European Commission, our colleague José Manuel Barroso. He was Prime Minister. At the time I was President of the Portuguese Institute of Public Administration, INA. And we were both convinced that we should change public procurement for a lot of reasons, namely to increase transparency, to produce savings, and to bring public procurement to the new challenges and developments already happening in private sector. And so a plan for change started there and was implemented through different governments. We had, after José Barroso, we have 1, 2, 3 different prime ministers. They all went on along that direction, and we were able to use e-procurement very much based on software as a service. And so most public administrations and most economic operators have just to pay a very small fee. They can use the service. And from November 2009, we were the first member state using e-public procurement mandatory for any competitive procedure. And I have to tell you that there were no serious problems coming from this adoption. Sometimes people say, wow, it's easy or it's feasible for big institutions, for big municipalities, but what about the small ones? And for instance, in Brussels, in several conferences, I heard this fear. It's completely, absolutely wrong. In our case, the small institutions, the small municipalities, the small companies were the very, very first ones to adopt. The biggest municipality in Portugal was the very last one to adopt. So it means that this is a help for small companies, this is a help for small public authorities. Why? Because meanwhile we have this market of services, of electronic procurement. There are several companies offering this service, and if you are a small institution you pay a very small fee and you have lots of savings. So this process of change has really shown that society, civil society, is much more ripe to change than sometimes bureaucrats, national or European bureaucrats, believe. So it's interesting, it's a case where society has advanced more rapidly than in some cases the political leaders. But of course, when we explain, I had to explain that at least to two prime ministers, the advantage of that, the feasibility of that, when they received a few letters saying that the chaos would come to Portugal because we adopted procurement, they didn't believe, and they were right. And right now, this process of change will be disseminated in other member states across Europe. And we are very happy because if not, you don't have more cross-border in e-procurement. You know that Europe was able to build up an internal market, a single market. That was an adventure of more than 25-30 years of progress. But now if you produce eggs, you can very easily sell them in Germany, and if you produce cars in Germany, you can sell them in Portugal. But when we look to public procurement, less than 4%. So in some way, we didn't build yet a European cross-border internal market. And I believe that e-procurement can be a very important step on that direction.